Hello, 7th graders. Today we're going to be reminded how we're going to do our conclusion for our plant lab. So to do this, we actually need to gather up three things. First, your brown plant lab rubric. That should be in your plant folder with all of your plant things. 2, your paper with your problem, hypothesis, experiment, and setup sketch. This is the one where I wrote OK to set up on the bottom of that paper. And all of your observations. So it should look like this. This is your brown rubric that you're looking for. This is the page where you have your problem, your hypothesis that you wrote, your experiment, your sketch of your setup, and I wrote OK to set up. Some of you have handwritten this, some of you have typed this page. Then you have a whole bunch of observations. Maybe you even have a graph. And those are the things that you need in order to do your conclusion. So let's go back and take a look at what it is you need to do in a conclusion. So you have the problem done, you have your hypothesis done, you have your experiment steps done, and your setup sketch, you have your observations done, and now you're ready to do your conclusion. So if we look at advanced 4 points, it says that the conclusion answers questions with elaborated, thoughtful, persuasive statements. So let's go over here and see what it is you need to do. It says you need to answer these 4 questions. So you need to answer, according to your data, what is the answer to your problem question? So if I go back and take a look at the sample one here, their problem question is, will different size pots affect the growth of sunflower plants? So they need to determine what is the answer to that question. And they should be referring to their data and be thinking about, do different size pots actually matter? The second thing you're going to answer in the second paragraph is, do you support or reject your hypothesis? Explain. So again, you need to go back and take a look at your hypothesis. Do you agree with it or don't you agree with it? And explain why or why not. The third thing you need to do is answer this question. Were there any possible sources of error in your experiment? Explain. So anything that went wrong, or you accidentally watered with the wrong thing, your plant got tipped over, something got broke on it, was something a possible error? And then the fourth question that you are going to answer is, if you had to do your experiment over, what would you do differently and why? So this will make 4 paragraphs in your conclusion. So let's go take a look at the sample conclusion. First thing you had to do was, according to your data, what is the answer to your problem question? So if we take a look at the sample conclusion, look at how they started the paragraph. According to the data we gathered in our observations, we believe that different size pots do affect the growth of sunflower plants. Now here's their evidence. Fewer seeds germinated in the smaller pot, 4 sprouts, than in the larger pot, 6 sprouts. Also, the plants in the larger pot had an average final height of 22.3 centimeters, and an average final height in the smaller pot was 20.1 centimeters. See the data table and graph. So that takes care of the first question. Reminder what the second question was. The second question was, do you support or reject your hypothesis? So look how they started this paragraph. We reject our hypothesis because. Then they go on to say it was only partially correct. Here's what we thought was going to happen. Here's what we had a little bit of difficulty with. We think the smaller pot had less growth because the smaller pot limited the sprout's water supply. So they went on to say, we never saw evidence of crowded roots or roots growing out the bottom holes in the pot like they thought they might see. The third thing that you were asked to do in your conclusion was, were there any possible sources of error in your experiment? Let's see how they started the third paragraph. We reject our hypothesis because it was there were several possible sources of error in our experiment. So it says we tried to keep both pots at the same level of moisture, but if we had one pot more moist than the other, so they went on to explain what could have been possible errors here, and they had several things they were thinking about. We may have planted our seeds at slightly different depths or angles, so they had different things they were thinking about. And then the final fourth question is, if you had to do your experiment over, what would you do differently? So let's look at how they started the fourth paragraph. If we had to do this, or we were to do this experiment over, we would use a plant like corn. So here's what they would do. Here's why they would do this. These are the things that they would be thinking about. So that helps us figure out the 4 things we need to do. So now, what is it that you can be doing? Well, to do your conclusion, you may do any of these. You may type your conclusion following the sample on the back of the pink example sheet. So the pink example sheets are sitting on your tables, and you can see those. And work on that. Just type straight with the computer and print it off. You can also get a conclusion template off Moodle with those starter sentences for each paragraph. Remember to do file, make a copy. So that means if you go to Moodle, you'll get these highlighted 4 sentences, and then you can just fill in your paragraphs. Your other option is to get a paper copy of the conclusion template with the starter sentences for each paragraph off the front table and handwrite in your conclusion. So that would be on the front table. When you are finished, you should have your problem, your hypothesis, your experiment, your observations, and your conclusion all ready to turn in with your brown rubric tomorrow. Once you feel like you have that all done today, then you should start working on the fruits, veggies, and spices sheet that you have. Make it a good conclusion.